King Thalen lifted the poisoned cup and smiled at the woman who had been sent to murder him. Nessa Harrow had expected suspicion. She had expected a guard's hand around her wrist, a blade against her throat, perhaps an arrow through her heart before the crystal goblet ever reached the king's lips. She had not expected him to lean close enough for his silver hair to brush her cheek. Nessa Harrow, he murmured, while music and laughter filled the hall of leaves around them. Daughter of Garin Harrow, sister of Rowan Harrow, who is not in the prison cell Chancellor Vane showed you. The tray trembled in her hands. Thalen's eyes, green and bright as sunlight through deep water, dropped to the wine. There is enough widow glass in this cup to stop an elven heart before the final bell, he said. Nessa could barely force air into her lungs. Then don't drink it. His gaze returned to hers. There was no fear in it, only a decision he had already made. When I fall, do not let my cousin touch my body. Then the Elf King drank every drop. 3 days earlier, Nessa had been standing behind the counter of her apothecary in Dunmere, grinding fever bark beneath a gray afternoon sky. The shop was narrow, warm, and crowded with the useful clutter of a life spent measuring things. Bundles of herbs hung from the rafters, amber bottles crowded the shelves. A copper kettle clicked over the stove, and rain tapped against the front window with the patient insistence of someone waiting to be admitted. Nessa liked the shop best in bad weather. Rain kept away customers who wanted miracles for the price of mint tea, and it softened the noise from the market outside. She had just finished dividing a jar of lungwort when the bell above the door rang once. The man who entered wore no crest, but he did not need one. Chancellor Edric Vane's servants all carried themselves as though the street belonged to him, and the stones had been laid for their convenience. This one was broad through the shoulders, clean-shaven and dry despite the rain. 2 others remained outside beneath the awning. "Mistress Harrow," he said, "the shop is closed." He glanced at the unlocked door. "Your sign says otherwise." "My sign hasn't met you." The man placed a small object on the counter. It was Rowan's brass compass, dented along one edge where he had dropped it from the old quarry wall when he was 12. Nessa's fingers went still around the pestle. "Where is my brother?" "Alive. For now." She looked at the man's hands, his stance, the distance between them, the knife under his coat. She had spent half her life learning what a body could endure, and the other half learning how quickly it could fail. There were 6 powders within reach that would blind him, 3 that would stop his breathing, and 1 jar of dried nettle that would merely make him itch for a week. None would help Rowan if the 2 men outside had orders to kill him. "What does Vane want?" The servant smiled without warmth. "Peace. Men like the Chancellor only use that word when they want someone else to bleed for it." He set a folded letter beside the compass. The seal bore the White Tower of Darrow, the human kingdom that had spent 20 years trading insults, timber, and occasional arrows with the elves of Lotharis. King Thalen had agreed to receive a human delegation for the first formal peace banquet since the Ashfield War. Half of Dunmere had celebrated when the announcement came. The other half had started sharpening knives. Nessa broke the seal. Inside were travel papers bearing her name, an appointment to the delegation's medical staff, and a single line written in Chancellor Vane's narrow hand. "The king will drink star wine at the final toast. You will prepare the cup." The servant placed a dark blue vial on top of the letter. Nessa did not touch it. "Widow glass." "You recognize it?" "My father invented the method used to refine it." "Which is why the Chancellor selected you." Widow glass came from a white flower that grew in iron-rich marshes. It was harmless to humans in small quantities. In an elf, it entered the fine channels that carried magic through the blood and hardened there. First came weakness, then silence in the pulse, then death. No scent, no taste, no discoloration. The perfect weapon for a banquet pretending to celebrate peace. If Thalen dies at a human table, there will be war by sunrise. If Thalen lives, there will be war by winter. The Chancellor prefers to choose the hour. Nessa unfolded the letter completely. A second message had been written beneath the first. When the palace bells announce the king's death, Rowan walks free. I want to see him. You may see him now. The servant nodded toward the carriage waiting across the street. They took her beneath the old courthouse to an iron cell that smelled of rust and standing water. Rowan was thinner than he had been 6 weeks ago, with a bruised eye and a chain around one ankle. But he crossed the cell the moment he saw her. Nessa pressed both hands to the bars. They said you sold military maps. I copied grain ledgers. Apparently numbers become treason when the wrong man reads them. His failed smile vanished when she mentioned joining the delegation. Rowan had always been poor at following rules and very good at hearing lies. Don't do whatever they asked you to do, Ness. The guard pulled her away before she could answer. Their father had been hanged as a traitor when Rowan was 9, leaving Nessa to become sister, parent, and protector. She did not look back. If she had, she might have broken before reaching the stairs. That night, she opened the blue vial in the locked workroom behind her shop. Widow glass did not look like glass. It looked like clear water, slightly thick when it moved, with a pale line of sediment at the bottom. Her father had taught her the principles of it before she was old enough to understand why anyone would want such knowledge. Harrow had been apothecary to the human army during the Ashfield War. He had made medicines, smoke powders, sleeping draughts, and, once, under direct command, widow glass. 6 elven officers had died. 200 human soldiers had escaped an encirclement because of it. 3 years later, Garin was accused of selling the formula to Lotharis and executed in Dunmere's public square. Nessa had watched from a roof because Vane's soldiers would not let children into the square. She remembered her father's gray coat, the rope, and the way he searched the crowd until he found the place where she was hiding. He had not begged. He had only shaken his head once, as though there were something he needed her not to believe. For 19 years, she had believed the Elf King demanded his death. Now she was being sent to return the favor. Nessa worked until dawn. She tested the widow glass against powdered moon pearl, black salt, powdered antler, and a thread from an enchanted court cloak Vane's servant had supplied. The poison was pure. It would kill Thalen quickly, but not instantly. Garin had designed it with a narrow delay because no substance moved through every body at the same speed. In a strong elf, there might be 100 heartbeats between the first weakness and the point from which no healer could call him back. She prepared an antidote. It would not save him if the whole vial entered his blood. Nothing could. But Nessa had no intention of using the whole vial. She measured 1/3 into a wax capsule, mixed in tasteless valerian to deepen the collapse, and sealed the antidote inside a sliver of glass no longer than her smallest finger. She stitched the sliver into the lining of her left sleeve. It was not a plan to save the king. She told herself that several times. It was a plan to preserve a choice until the last possible moment. The delegation crossed the river the following morning. Lotharis rose from the forest without walls, its pale bridges curving between immense trunks and its towers climbing through golden leaves. It was beautiful enough to make Nessa angry. Human axes and elven arrows had spilled too much blood for the peace banners to look innocent. At the palace, Captain Illyra searched her. The bronze-skinned elf found neither the vial hidden in Nessa's boot nor the antidote in her sleeve, but she recognized the name Harrow. That evening, Nessa saw the king beneath the living canopy of the Hall of Leaves. Thalen wore a black circlet and a pine-green coat, his silver hair loose at his shoulders. He listened to the ambassador's speech with the weariness of a man who had heard centuries of promises. His gaze found Nessa among the servants and stayed there. There was no reason for him to know her, yet the hidden vial suddenly felt as large as a bell. Prince Corvin, his pale-haired cousin and heir, interrupted the moment. Unlike Thalen, Corvin smiled easily. When he greeted Nessa as Dunmere's keeper of unpleasant remedies, she replied, "Most remedies are unpleasant. That's how people know they're working." His smile widened, while Captain Illyra watched them both. The banquet began at moonrise. Nessa was assigned to examine each dish before it reached the human ambassador, an empty courtesy meant to show mutual trust. There were 7 courses. Musicians played from a gallery hidden by leaves. Elven nobles spoke softly, while human officials laughed too loudly. King Thalen ate almost nothing. During the 6th course, a kitchen servant brushed Nessa's elbow and left a folded strip of paper beneath her hand. The South Tower, 3rd window. He waits for the bells. She did not need a name. Rowan was alive. Rowan was somewhere they could hurt him. At the final course, servants brought out star wine in crystal decanters. Tradition required the cup to be prepared by a member of the visiting delegation and offered directly to the host. Ambassador Pell selected Nessa with a gracious gesture that had been arranged days before. Every face in the hall seemed to turn toward her. Nessa carried the empty goblet to the preparation table. Her hands were steady. She poured the wine. Beneath the cover of her sleeve, she broke the wax capsule and let the measured widow glass fall into the cup. It vanished without a ripple. She could still refuse. She could drop the goblet. She could shout. She could drink it herself, though the poison would not kill her, and Vane's observers would know. Every possible choice ended with Rowan in a cell and soldiers at the border. Nessa lifted the tray. The walk to the dais was 24 steps. She counted each one. King Thalen watched her approach. Prince Corvin sat at his right hand. Captain Illyra stood behind him. At the final step, Nessa lowered her head and presented the cup. "To peace between our peoples," the ambassador declared. Thalen did not take the goblet immediately. "Look at me," he said. The words were quiet enough that only those nearest could hear. Nessa raised her eyes. That was when he said her name. Her father's name. Rowan's name. That was when he told her that the prison cell was a lie. "There is widow glass in this cup," he murmured. "Then don't drink it." "When I fall, do not let my cousin touch my body." He took the goblet from her and drank. For several seconds, nothing happened. Thalen returned the empty cup to the tray. The human ambassador continued speaking about a new age of cooperation. Prince Corvin watched with an amused curve to his mouth. Then the king's fingers closed hard around the edge of the table. The nearest candles went out. Thalen drew one slow breath. His eyes lost their green light, fading to an ordinary gray. He stood as if to answer the toast, but his knees gave way beneath him. The silver cup struck the floor. Captain Illyra caught him before his head hit the stone. The hall erupted. Elven guards sealed the doors. Human delegates shouted that it was an attack. Someone drew a sword. Nessa dropped the tray and moved toward the king, but Prince Corvin reached him first. "No," Nessa said. Corvin's hand stopped above Thalen's chest. "What did you say?" She remembered the king's final instruction. Fear had become useless. "I said don't touch him. If this is poison, anything on his skin could spread it." It was a plausible lie, delivered in the flat tone she used when customers attempted to argue with a diagnosis. Corvin rose slowly. "And you know this because?" "Because I am an apothecary." "You prepared the cup." Captain Ilira's sword appeared at Nessa's throat. The blade was so sharp she did not feel the cut until a warm line reached her collar. "Take her," Corvin ordered. Ilira looked at him, then down at the unconscious king. "The king gave me standing instructions for this event. I am his heir. He is not dead." The captain lifted Thalen into her arms with surprising ease. To Nessa, she said, "Walk." They moved through a side door behind the dais. 4 guards followed. Corvin called after them, but Ilira did not stop. The passage beyond the hall bent twice and descended into darkness. Nessa expected a dungeon. Instead, the captain pressed her palm against a blank wall. Roots withdrew from the stone, revealing a narrow stair. "The antidote," Ilira said as soon as the wall closed behind them. Nessa stared at her. "His Majesty said it was sewn into your left sleeve. If he was wrong, you will die before he does." Nessa tore the seam open with her teeth and caught the glass sliver in her palm. They carried Thalen to a hidden chamber beneath the palace. An elderly elf waited beside a low bed surrounded by shelves of instruments. His white hair had been cut close to his skull, and one of his hands was made of jointed silver. "How much?" he demanded. 1/3 of the vial, Nessa said. "Exact measure," she told him. The old healer looked at her with open disbelief. "You poisoned the king and brought the cure?" "Decide how offended you are after we keep him alive." Together they worked. Nessa broke the antidote into warmed water, while the healer, Master Orin, opened a vein at Thalen's wrist with a silver lancet. His blood was darker than human blood and shone faintly where it touched the bowl. Nessa poured charcoal infusion between his lips, pressed 2 fingers beneath his jaw, and waited for him to swallow. Nothing. "His channels are closing," Orin said. "I cannot reach his magic." "Stop trying to reach the magic. Keep his body alive." "They are not separate." "Tonight, they have to be." She ordered hot stones, salt, and white nettle. Ilira obeyed without question. They wrapped Thalen in heated blankets while Nessa worked the antidote into the vein at his wrist. Elven medicine tried to persuade the body through magic. Human medicine had learned to work without being invited. Nessa rubbed his sternum, forced air into his lungs, and counted every faint beat beneath her hand. At 73, his heart stopped. Orin made a broken sound. Nessa climbed onto the bed, placed both hands over the center of Thalen's chest, and pushed. Once. Twice. Again. His ribs resisted like green wood. She kept going. "Come back," she said through clenched teeth. "You don't get to make me part of your clever plan and then leave me to explain it." At the 10th compression, the room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Thalen's back arched, and he dragged in a harsh breath. The lamps flared green. Nessa nearly collapsed over him. His eyes opened only a fraction. They were still gray. "You counted wrong," he whispered. "Be quiet." That sounded like an order. It was. The corner of his mouth moved, then he lost consciousness again. For the next 6 hours, the palace believed its king was dying in the royal apartments. Prince Corvin stationed guards at every gate. The human delegation was confined to the western wing. Bells rang once each hour, slow and mournful, while rumors multiplied through the city. Below them, Thalen slept in a room known only to 4 people. The widow glass had retreated from his heart, but thin black lines remained beneath the skin of his arms. His natural warmth had vanished. Without magic moving through his blood, his body could not hold heat. Nessa sat beside him, changing hot stones whenever they cooled. She had not slept in 2 nights. Dried blood stiffened one sleeve of her banquet dress, and her neck still stung where Illyra's blade had cut it. Captain Illyra stood across the bed. "If he dies, I will kill you." "You've mentioned that. I want no confusion between us." "There isn't any." Master Orin returned from the adjoining workroom carrying the empty goblet in a cloth. This was not the only poison. Nessa looked up. He set the goblet beneath a blue lamp. A dark violet ring had appeared around the base. "Morning salt," Orin said. "It reacts with widow glass." Nessa leaned closer. Morning salt was ground from mineral deposits found beneath ancient elven burial groves. It accelerated any magic-borne poison. Her antidote should have cleared the king's blood by now. With morning salt in the cup, it had only slowed it. "I didn't add that." "I know," said a weak voice from the bed. Thalen was awake. He tried to sit. Pain tightened his face, and the effort ended with him braced on one elbow. Illyra moved to help him, but he shook his head. "How long?" he asked. 6 hours, Orin said. "The palace thinks you are at the edge of death." "Good." Nessa stared at him. "Your heart stopped." "Less good." "You knew I had an antidote in my sleeve. You knew my name. You knew about Rowan. Start explaining before I decide the poison deserves another chance." Illyra's hand moved toward her sword. Thalen looked at the captain. "Leave us." "No. That was not a request. You can barely sit upright." "Then Mistress Harrow should have little difficulty finishing what she began." Nessa folded her arms. "Don't tempt me." Something like approval passed through his tired eyes. Illyra muttered an elven curse, then followed Orin into the workroom. Thalen waited until the door shut. "For 7 months, someone has been poisoning Oral, the heart tree beneath this city." Nessa had heard of Oral. Human stories called it the first tree, grown from a seed that fell with the stars. Its roots were said to touch every ward and living structure in Latharis. "Trees don't drink from goblets." "No, they drink from the river. Small amounts of widow glass have appeared in the eastern roots. Not enough to kill Oral quickly, enough to make our border wards fail one by one." "And you think the poison came from Darrow?" "I thought someone wanted me to think that." "Widow glass is a human invention. Morning salt is elven. Whoever is doing this requires partners on both sides of the river." Nessa looked at the black lines beneath his skin. "So you let me poison you?" "I let them believe they had succeeded." "You had no guarantee I would bring an antidote." "I read your trial records. You were arrested at 17 for refusing to prepare smoke poison for General Vane. At 21, you treated 3 elven prisoners during a fever outbreak, though the law forbade it. Last winter, you falsified a death certificate to keep a debtor's infant out of a workhouse. You've been spying on me. I have been studying every apothecary capable of making widow glass. There are only 4 alive. 2 work directly for Vane. 1 is too frightened to cross his own street. Then, there is you. You knew he'd use Rowan." "I suspected it. My agents reached the courthouse cell yesterday. The room had been emptied. The blood on the floor was old, and the guards had been paid to show you a prisoner who would be moved before dawn." Nessa gripped the arms of the chair. "Where is he?" "I don't know yet." "Then everything you said at the banquet was a trick." "No. Rowan was alive 2 days ago. One of my agents saw him transferred in a covered wagon bearing no crest. The wagon crossed the river into Latharis before the delegation arrived. Her anger faltered. They brought him here? That is what we must discover. We? Thalen looked toward the ceiling, where the bells had begun to ring again. By morning, my cousin will ask the council to name him regent.
Chancellor Vane will accuse Latharis of murdering its human guests. Someone will make an attempt on the heart tree while the city is divided. You can identify the poison. I can move through places closed to humans. At the moment, you can barely move across this bed. Then we will each provide what the other lacks. Nessa stood. Exhaustion made the floor shift beneath her, but she kept her voice steady. My brother first. If we do not stop what is happening beneath this city, there may be no border left to carry him across. My brother first. Thalen studied her face. Kings were probably accustomed to people yielding under silence. Nessa had spent years waiting out sick children, stubborn old men, and creditors. Silence did not impress her. At last he nodded. Your brother first. He held out his hand. She looked at it. His fingers were long, his palm marked by the pale scars of old sword wounds. The black veins of widow glass reached almost to his wrist. This is not forgiveness, she said. I would distrust you if it were. Nessa took his hand. It was colder than the rain outside her shop. By dawn, King Thalen was dead. That was the announcement made from the palace steps. The bells rang without pause, and black banners unfurled from the living towers. In the western wing, the human ambassador demanded passage home. Prince Corvin appeared before the council wearing white mourning robes and spoke of betrayal, justice, and the burden of leadership. Chancellor Vane sent a hawk across the river before breakfast. Hidden below the palace, the dead king argued with Nessa about broth. It smells like boiled rope, Thalen said. You have eaten boiled rope? I have lived a long time. Drink it. Or I ask Captain Elira to hold your nose while I pour it in. Elira, standing by the door, said, Gladly. Thalen drank the broth. Without his magic, he looked less like a figure carved on a monument. Color had begun to return to his face. A dark strand of hair, almost black, had appeared among the silver near his temple. Orin said it would vanish if the king's channels reopened. Nessa found herself hoping it would not. Perfection made a person difficult to trust. The dark strand looked honest. They waited until night to leave the chamber. Orin dressed Thalen in a guard's plain cloak and used a bitter-smelling paste to dull the shine of his hair. Nessa wore a servant's gray dress. Elira led them through passages formed between the palace routes. The wagon crossed at Northbridge, Thalen said as they walked. His voice remained low, conserving strength. It entered the old quarter and vanished near the abandoned bell foundry. Why would Vane move Rowan into an elven city? Perhaps Rowan saw something he should not have seen. He copies accounts for the grain office. He sees numbers. Numbers have ended more reigns than swords. The old bell foundry had been swallowed by roots, but fresh wheel marks crossed its dusty floor. Nessa found cloth from a human prison uniform, snagged beside a hidden stair. Below, a dead agent wearing Vane's colors carried a token used in the city's underground water channels. They followed the channel east, guided by chalk marks Rowan had used since childhood. At the third junction, an elf and a human guarded a barred door. Nessa blinded one with yellow root powder. Thalen caught the other, but his poisoned strength failed. Nessa pulled a water gate chain,
and a freezing surge knocked the man down for Illyra to disarm. Thalen sank against the wall. He had a knife. You were closer. And you are supposed to be dead, not trying to make it permanent. His pulse raced beneath Nessa's fingers, but he insisted they search the room first. Rowan was gone. He had left numbers scratched into the wall. Nessa recognized shipment weights. Thalen recognized dates written with the old elven calendar. The last entry named Tomorrow Night and Root Gate 9 beneath Oral. Their surviving guard finally admitted Prince Corvin had moved Rowan to the Bell Vault, a prison no one was meant to leave. Thalen's face changed. I know where it is. The Bell Vault lay beneath the tombs of the first elven kings. Its iron cells had once held prisoners whose voices could alter memory. Corvin had sealed it 2 centuries earlier, claiming the chambers were unstable. Thalen had never questioned him. Nessa observed that people hid things where no one inspected, and Thalen reminded her of the vial in her boot. His brief laugh became a cough. The black lines had reached his throat. Orin was furious when they returned, but his anger became concern when Thalen nearly fainted. The king's worsening condition confirmed that his coronation bond with Oral was feeding the tree's poison back into him. The Bell Vault required the living king's blood to open, so Thalen would have to go. Orin forced him to rest for 1 hour first, threatening to have Nessa sit on him if he refused. Thalen drank his medicine without further argument. While he slept, Nessa tested widow glass crystals scraped from Oral's roots. A heated iron probe made the crystals cloud and crumble. The poison fastened itself to magic, but ordinary iron gave it a weaker anchor. By redirecting water through the abandoned foundry's iron slag, then adding white nettle and sunseed, they might flush the poison from Oral. Orin objected that she was treating the first tree like a fever patient. Nessa replied that it was a fever patient, only larger. The temple records arrived before Thalen woke. One name appeared beside every delivery of morning salt for the past year. Prince Corvin, collected for royal funerary rites. The quantities were small but regular. Below the final entry was an authorization bearing Thalen's seal. Illyra examined it. A forgery. A good one, Nessa said. Corvin has had access to the king's private documents since childhood. He also reached Thalen before anyone else at the banquet. He expected the king to die, but he wanted to touch the body. Why? Orin's silver fingers clicked softly against the table. To confirm the royal bond had broken. If Thalen died, the mark of succession would appear on the nearest blood heir. And if the bond had not moved to Corvin, he would know Thalen was alive. The door opened behind them. Thalen stood there in a plain black coat, pale but steady. Then we should not keep my cousin waiting. They entered the Bell Vault shortly before midnight through the oldest royal tomb. Iron cut off Oral's poisoned magic, and a trace of green returned to Thalen's eyes as they descended. At the bottom, iron doors surrounded a black bell without a clapper. Thalen warned that it rang with whatever a person most regretted. Nessa walked past it. Then it would have plenty to say. They found Rowan in the 7th cell. He was asleep on the floor with his back against the wall. One wrist was chained above his head, and dried blood marked the side of his face. For a moment, Nessa could not move. Then Rowan opened his eyes. Ness? She reached through the bars. Their fingers met. I told you not to do it, he said. Her laugh broke in the middle. You also told me you weren't badly hurt. We're both liars. Thalen's blood failed to open Rowan's iron cell while his royal bond was poisoned. Nessa removed a steel measuring spatula from her boot. They searched an apothecary for weapons. They didn't search her for spoons. With 2 hairpins from Illyra and language that made Thalen raise an eyebrow, She opened the lock. Nessa had barely pulled Rowan into her arms when a slow clap echoed around the vault. Prince Corvin stood beside the black bell. He wore mourning white and carried no visible weapon. Chancellor Edric Vane stood to his left, wrapped in a traveling cloak. 12 guards filled the corridor behind them, half human and half elf. "I admit," Corvin said, "I expected Illyra to disobey me. I did not expect my cousin to crawl out of his deathbed." Vane's eyes fixed on Nessa. "You had one task." "You lied about freeing Rowan." "I made a promise contingent upon success. The king appears distressingly alive." Thalen stepped in front of Nessa and Rowan. Without his magic, he was only one man facing 12, but the guards shifted when he looked at them. "Kneel," he said. 3 elves obeyed by instinct. Corvin's face tightened. "Look closely," Corvin told them. "The royal light is gone from his eyes. Oral has rejected him. This is not your king. It is a dying vessel that refuses to understand it is empty." "You have poisoned the heart tree," Illyra said. "I have freed it. Thalen bound our people to human treaties, human iron, human weakness. He let their roads cut the outer groves. He invited their merchants into our city. He would have us become a curiosity sold by the yard in Dunmere markets." Vane gave him a cold look. "Your speech was shorter when we agreed on the price of the northern mines." Corvin's smile vanished. For the first time, the elven guards looked uncertain. Nessa understood. "You don't believe any of it. You want the crown, and Vane wants the mines. The war is just how you pay each other." "War is how kingdoms remember what they are," Corvin said. "Tomorrow, during the morning assembly, the final dose will enter Root Gate 9. Auril will die. Its death will shatter every ward along the river. Vane's soldiers will cross before sunset, kill enough elves to make peace impossible, then retreat. I will lead the answer. He will lead his. We will both inherit frightened nations grateful for strong hands." Rowan leaned close to Nessa. The grain ledgers hid the shipments. Bags listed as spoiled barley were filled with ground morning salt. "I found the weight differences." Vane heard him. A gifted clerk. Unfortunately, gifts encourage inconvenient ambition. Thalen looked at the Chancellor. Nessa Harrow found the same differences 19 years ago. Nessa turned toward him. Vane's expression remained smooth, but Corvin glanced at him. "You knew?" Nessa asked Thalen. "Not then. I received documents bearing your father's seal, offering widow glass to an elven commander. Human witnesses swore he had betrayed Darrow. I sent a demand for his arrest. Vane changed it into an order for execution. You signed the accusation." "I did." "You never asked whether the evidence was true." "No." The answer was not an excuse. Somehow that made it hurt more. Thalen faced her fully despite the guards, the vault, and his cousin. "I learned the truth 7 months ago when the first poison appeared in Auril. Your father's formula carried a flaw that the copies do not. He recorded it in a letter that never reached me. He had discovered Vane's network. He died trying to expose it." Nessa could see the square again, the gray coat and the rope. "And you thought letting his daughter poison you would settle the debt?" "No debt like that can be settled. I knew who you were, Nessa. I knew what I had taken from you. I also knew you had prepared an antidote. Asking you to trust me would have been an insult. So I placed my life where the choice belonged, in your hands." For one dangerous second, the vault contained nothing but the two of them. Then Corvin sighed. "Touching. Take them." The fight was brief. Illyra dropped 2 guards before an iron club struck her shoulder. Thalen moved toward Corvin, but the widow glass flared beneath his skin. He fell to one knee. Nessa threw a vial at the floor, filling the corridor with choking red smoke. She got Rowan as far as the 3rd cell before someone caught her hair and dragged her backward. When the smoke cleared, all 4 of them were behind iron doors. Corvin crouched outside Thalen's cell. At noon tomorrow, the council will name me regent. At sunset, the humans will attack. You will remain here long enough to hear the city die. You always mistook an audience for loyalty, Thalen said. Corvin struck the bars with his palm. The sound woke the black bell. It gave a single low note. Everyone in the corridor froze. The note did not pass through the ears. It moved through bone. Nessa heard her father's last words, though she had been too far away to hear them on the day he died. Take care of your brother. Rowan covered his face. Vane stumbled as if someone had pushed him. Corvin's confidence cracked. Thalen looked toward the bell. You should not have brought your regrets into this room, cousin. Corvin ordered the guards out. Their footsteps retreated up the stairs. Vane followed, but not before Nessa saw what the bell had put into his face. Fear. The cells grew quiet. Illyra sat with her injured shoulder against the wall. Rowan occupied the cell opposite Nessa. Thalen was beside him, separated from them by 2 sets of bars. Can the bell open the doors? Nessa asked. It can break them, Thalen said. It can also break us. Encouraging. The bell was made to contain voices that altered memory. If struck with the correct resonance, it forces every piece of iron in the vault to answer. There is no clapper. It does not require one. It requires a voice carrying royal magic. Nessa looked at his gray eyes. Which you don't have. Not enough to command a tree. Perhaps enough to irritate a bell. Rowan reached through his bars and held out his hand. Then take mine. Human iron gives the poison something else to hold on to, right? Nessa said that in her notes years ago. Nessa stared at him. You read my locked notebooks? This may not be the ideal time. There will be a time. Thalen closed his hand around Rowan's through the bars. Nessa understood what her brother meant. The king's magic could not move freely through poisoned elven channels. A human body carried no magical channels at all. It might act as a ground, just as the iron probe had. It may stop your heart, she told Rowan. Everyone keeps saying that today. Nessa reached through her own bars and caught his other hand. If you let go, I will kill you myself. Good to see you too. Thalen began to sing. It was not a song Nessa could follow. The first note was scarcely more than breath. The second entered the walls. On the third, the black lines beneath his skin lit silver. Rowan cried out, and Nessa felt a current run through her brother's hand into her own bones. The black bell answered. Its note was enormous. Every door in the vault shuddered. Rust burst from the hinges in red clouds. The locks screamed against their frames. Thalen's voice rose, rough and breaking, while the bell poured regret through the room. Nessa saw her father, her shop, the poisoned cup. She saw Thalen alone at a council table, reading the order that killed Garen, then reading it again 19 years later with the truth in his hands. The locks broke. Silence dropped so suddenly that Nessa heard blood moving in her ears. Thalen collapsed. Rowan fell beside him, conscious but shaking. Nessa crawled through the open door and pressed her hand to the king's chest. His heart beat once, paused, then beat again. That, she said, fighting tears she did not have time for, was a remarkably stupid plan. His eyes opened. A faint green spark had returned to them. It worked. That doesn't make it less stupid. Illyra retrieved her sword from the corridor. We have less than 12 hours. You may continue flirting after we save the city. Nessa and Thalen looked at her. We are not flirting, Nessa said. Of course not. They returned to the foundry before dawn. Rowan showed them the sections of the ledgers he had memorized. Corvin's final shipment contained 40 barrels, enough widow glass and morning salt to kill Oral before the iron in the soil could weaken it. The barrels would travel through Route Gate 9 during the public morning assembly, when every council member stood above the heart chamber. Nessa explained her plan, while Illyra gathered the few guards she still trusted. The old foundry's cooling trench could divert water through iron slag, but the sluice mechanism had rusted shut. Rowan and 2 guards went to free it. Orin began grinding every measure of white nettle and sunseed in the palace stores. Thalen was supposed to rest. Instead, Nessa found him alone in the workroom, fastening a sword belt around his waist. You cannot fight Corvin in your condition. He will not surrender because I ask politely. I can barely feel your pulse from across a room. That seems medically imprecise. She took the belt from his hands. Sit. To her surprise, he did. Nessa checked the dark veins along his throat. They had stopped spreading, but his skin remained cold. She mixed iron tonic in a small cup and handed it to him. This tastes worse than the broth. I worked hard on that. He drank. For a while, neither spoke. The hidden room seemed very far from the city preparing to mourn him. My father looked at me before he died, Nessa said. He shook his head. I thought he was telling me not to cry. Thalen rested his forearms on his knees. Perhaps he was telling you not to believe them. You don't get to make his final moment kinder. No. I haven't forgiven you. I know. Part of me may never forgive you. He met her eyes. I know that, too. She had expected a king to bargain, defend, or offer some grand act in exchange for absolution. Thalen simply accepted the wound as hers to keep. Why did you really drink? She asked. I told you. You told me the useful reasons. He was silent long enough that she thought he would refuse. Then he looked at the cup in his hands. Because when you walked toward me, you looked more frightened for the people in that room than for yourself. You had reduced the dose. You had made an antidote. You were trying to save your brother, my life, and a peace neither kingdom deserved from you. I have spent centuries surrounded by people who call caution wisdom. I wanted once to answer courage with courage. Nessa's throat tightened. That was still stupid, she said. I am beginning to understand that the two qualities can coexist. She reached for the sword belt and fastened it around him herself. Her hands paused at his waist. He lifted one hand as if to touch her face, then stopped before his fingers reached her. May I? He asked. It was such a small question. Kings were not known for asking it. Nessa nodded. His fingertips rested against her cheek, cool but no longer lifeless. She closed her eyes for one breath. Then the first morning bell rang above them. After, she said. After, he agreed. The morning assembly filled the heart chamber by noon. Oral rose through the center of the palace, a trunk of pale gold wider than the Dunmere courthouse. Its leaves formed the chamber's ceiling, though many had turned gray at the edges. Black veins pulsed beneath the bark. Hundreds of elves stood on curving galleries, while human delegates waited under guard near the western entrance. Prince Corvin stepped onto the root dais, wearing the black circlet he had taken from Thalen's room. "Our king is gone," he began, "murdered beneath the shelter of his own table by the people to whom he offered peace." Ambassador Pell shouted a denial. The galleries answered with angry voices. Corvin raised one hand, allowing the fury to grow before pretending to calm it. Beneath the floor, hidden gates opened. Nessa smelled widowglass before she saw it. Not the poison itself, which had no scent, but the vinegar used to rinse its barrels. She stood with Orin in a maintenance alcove above Root Gate 9. Rows of clay jars waited beside them, filled with white nettle, sunseed, and iron solution. "Not yet," she whispered. Across the chamber, Illyra moved among the guards loyal to Corvin. Rowan was still at the foundry fighting the old sluice. Thalen waited behind the royal passage, alive, but not yet strong enough to hold the room by force. Corvin drew his speech toward its conclusion. "Until the murderers answer for their crime, the gates of Litharis will close. The river treaty is ended. By blood and lawful succession, I accept the burden of regency." He lifted the black circlet. "That burden is not available," Thalen said. His voice crossed the chamber without effort. Every head turned. Thalen walked out beneath the dying leaves. He wore no mourning white, no royal coat, only dark clothes and the sword at his side. His face was pale. His eyes held a thin green light. But he was standing. The silence broke into hundreds of voices. Corvin's hand tightened around the circlet. "An illusion." "You always did mistake hope for evidence," Thalen said. "The heart tree rejected you. You poisoned it." Captain Illyra drew her sword. A dozen guards drew theirs with her. The remainder hesitated. Chancellor Vane moved toward the western door. Nessa stepped from the alcove. "Going somewhere?" He stopped. "You should have taken your brother and disappeared when you had the chance. You never intended to give me that chance. Your father had the same tiresome faith in truth." His hand slipped inside his coat. Nessa threw herself aside as a small crossbow snapped. The bolt struck Orin's silver hand and spun into the wall. Vane ran for the root gate. At the same moment, deep beneath the chamber, machinery groaned. Rowan had opened the foundry sluice. Rust-red water surged into the eastern channel. "Now!" Nessa shouted. Orin overturned the first jar. Nessa emptied the next two. White nettle and crushed sunseed vanished into the rushing water, followed by iron solution. The mixture foamed gold where it met the stream headed toward Oral. Corvin saw it. "Close gate 9!" Two of his guards ran for the wheel. Illyra intercepted one. The other reached Nessa before she could empty the final jar. He caught her around the waist and drove her against the railing. Pain burst through her shoulder. The jar slipped from her hands, but did not fall. Orin caught it against his chest. Thalen drew his sword. Corvin drew his own. They met on the root dais beneath the tree their family had guarded for thousands of years. Thalen was the better swordsman. In another hour, on another day, the fight might have ended in seconds. But widowglass lived in his blood. Corvin drove him backward, blow by blow, toward the edge of the dais. Nessa struck the guard holding her with the heel of her hand, missed anything useful, and received an elbow across the mouth. She tasted blood. Before the guard could hit her again, Rowan came over the railing from the lower stair and crashed into him with all the elegance of a falling cupboard. The three of them hit the floor. "The sluice is open!" Rowan shouted. "I noticed." Together they shoved the guard into the empty maintenance channel and pulled the gate lever. Iron bars dropped between them. Orin emptied the final jar. The treated water reached Oral. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the heart tree screamed. The sound tore through the palace. Golden leaves fell in a storm. Cracks raced across the chamber floor. The black veins beneath Oral's bark swelled as the widow glass resisted the iron. Nessa watched transparent crystals push out through the trunk like needles through skin. "It's too concentrated," Orin said. "The treatment cannot reach the central root." Nessa looked at the water, the tree, and the dark blood running from Thalen's nose as he fought Corvin. The central root was bound to the king. It had carried poison from tree to elf. A bond moved both ways. She grabbed the medical lancet from Orin's belt. "What are you doing?" Opening the other end. Nessa ran onto the dais. Corvin knocked Thalen's sword aside and drove him to one knee. He raised his blade for the final strike. Nessa slid across the wet root and plunged the lancet into the black vein at Thalen's wrist. Dark blood spilled over her hand. "Nessa," he gasped. "Trust me." She pressed the mouth of the final iron vial against the cut. The effect was immediate. Silver light raced up Thalen's arm. The widow glass crystals inside him broke apart, pulled toward the iron as water seeks lower ground. Oral answered through the royal bond. The black veins in the trunk flashed white. Corvin's sword came down. Thalen caught the blade in his bare hand. Green fire filled his eyes. Magic returned to the chamber like air after thunder. Every leaf of Oral turned gold at once. Living roots burst through the floor, wrapping around the poison barrels beneath Gate 9 and crushing them closed. Corvin tried to pull away. Thalen rose, still gripping his sword. "You wanted the strength of our ancestors," Thalen said. His voice carried the deep resonance of the whole tree. "You remembered their power and forgot their duty." He twisted the blade from Corvin's hand and threw it across the dais. Corvin reached for a hidden knife. Illyra's sword stopped against his throat. Around the chamber, his remaining guards lowered their weapons. Chancellor Vane made it as far as the western gallery. Rowan pointed him out, and the human ambassador, who had finally understood which side of the room was likely to survive, ordered his own guards to seize the Chancellor. Vane fought them until Nessa approached. "Your father was a fool," he spat. "He could have been rich." Nessa wiped blood from her mouth. "He was many things. He was never yours." Vane looked at the small vial in her hand and went pale. "It's empty," she said. "But thank you for confirming you know what it is." The ambassador's guards took him away. Only then did Nessa turn back to Thalen. He stood beneath Oral with gold light pouring around him. For a moment he looked exactly as a king in an old tale should look. Remote, powerful, beyond the reach of ordinary life. Then his knees buckled. Nessa reached him before he hit the floor. "Again?" she said, lowering him carefully against the root. "It has been a demanding week." "It has been 4 days." "That explains why I am tired." His magic was returning, but the poison had left him weak. Nessa pressed a cloth to his wrist. Above them, the council began shouting questions. Illyra was issuing orders. Rowan was laughing with the sharp relief of someone who had not yet decided whether to cry. Thalen touched Nessa's swollen lip with one careful finger. "Are you hurt?" "You died twice. I have a cut lip." "This is not about me." "It is to me." She looked at him. The chamber, the council, and the restored heart tree seemed to fall away. "After," he reminded her. Nessa bent and kissed him. It was not a courtly kiss. It was tired, startled, and tasted faintly of blood and iron tonic. Thalen's hand came to the back of her neck. The golden leaves above them rustled despite the absence of wind. When she pulled away, Rowan was standing several paces off with his arms folded. "I spent 6 weeks in a dungeon," he said, "and somehow this is still the most uncomfortable moment of my month." Nessa laughed until it hurt. The truth did not repair 2 kingdoms overnight. Truth rarely worked that quickly. Prince Corvin was tried before the Elven Council. The temple records, Rowan's memorized accounts, and the poison shipments were entered into evidence. Faced with a public trial, 3 of Corvin's allies confessed before the first week ended. Corvin was stripped of his title and confined in the same bell vault where he had kept Rowan. Thalen ordered the black bell removed. "Some regrets," he said, "should not be permitted to become entertainment." Chancellor Vane returned to Darrow in chains. Ambassador Pell discovered a sudden devotion to justice once he realized the Chancellor's private ledgers named half the officials who had mocked him. Vane's trial lasted 2 months. On its first morning, King Thalen crossed the river to testify. He carried Nessa Harrow's original letter. Nessa stood beside Rowan in the same public square where their father had died. Before the court, the king admitted his own part without softening it. He had trusted convenient evidence. He had allowed the hatred of war to make one human life seem smaller than his certainty. Garen's name was cleared, his property restored to his children, and his work entered into the records as the discovery that saved Oral. It did not bring him back. Afterward, Nessa went alone to the roof where she had hidden as a child. Thalen found her there near sunset, but did not approach until she held out her hand. "I thought this would feel different," she said. "How?" "Lighter." He sat beside her on the slate tiles, a king in a dark traveling coat with dust on his boots. "Justice is often too late to feel like justice." "That's a terrible royal motto." "I will ask the scribes to improve it." She rested her head against his shoulder. Below them, Rowan argued cheerfully with a court clerk about the value of 19 years of unpaid interest. "I still don't forgive all of it," Nessa said. "I did not come for forgiveness." "Why did you come?" "You held out your hand." So he sat with her until the square emptied and the evening bells began. Nessa reopened her shop, but elven patients soon crossed the river for remedies that did not rely on magic, while human healers traveled to study beneath Oral. Rowan became an auditor for the new River Trade Commission, turning suspicion into a respectable profession. Thalen visited whenever he could. At first, his arrival emptied the shop. By the 5th visit, the baker asked him to reach a jar from the top shelf. He never brought jewels, only strange medical books, difficult plants, and himself, tired from council arguments, to sit near Nessa's stove while she worked. 6 months after the banquet, Thalen asked her to establish a shared college of medicine on the river island between the 2 kingdoms. "Is that a royal command?" she asked. "No." "A political bribe?" "Possibly." "And if I refuse?" "I will be forced to continue inventing reasons to visit this shop. My council already suspects the truth." "Which is?" He looked around at the crowded shelves, the copper kettle, and the woman who had once placed poison in his hand. "I breathe more easily here." Nessa accepted the college. She did not accept a crown. She had no interest in sitting silently beside a throne while old elves debated timber law, and Thalen had never expected her to sit silently anywhere. Their college had 2 entrances, one facing each kingdom. Human iron supported living elven branches, and above the door, Rowan carved Nessa Harrow's name beside healers from both peoples. On the first anniversary of the peace banquet, the Hall of Leaves filled again. The musicians played the same opening song. The same long tables stood beneath the golden branches. This time, humans and elves were not separated by an aisle. They still watched one another carefully, but suspicion had softened into the ordinary discomfort of neighbors learning how much they had in common. Nessa stood beside the preparation table, wearing deep blue, with no servant's tray and no hidden vial in her boot. Thalen approached, carrying 2 crystal goblets. "Star wine," he said. "I can see that." "I thought you might examine it. For tradition." She took 1 cup, smelled it, then held it toward the light. "No widow glass." Reassuring. "A little too much winter clove." "I will execute the vintner." "Your sense of proportion remains poor." He smiled and offered her the other cup. Nessa looked across the hall. Illyra was pretending not to watch. Orin was openly watching. Rowan had already begun taking bets from 3 junior diplomats. "You first," Nessa said. Thalen lifted his goblet. "Again?" "You made a habit of drinking dangerous things." "Only when I know exactly who prepared them." The words carried none of the fear they had carried a year before. He knew who she was now, in ways no dossier could record. Garen's daughter. Rowan's impossible sister. An apothecary who measured carefully, argued relentlessly, and kept an antidote even for a man she believed she hated. The woman who had saved his life and refused to pretend that erased the life he had helped destroy. The woman who challenged him, treated him, and chose him without surrendering herself. Nessa touched her cup to his. "To peace?" he asked. "To better judgment. I may need more wine for that." They drank together. Later, beneath Oral's restored branches, Thalen asked if she would walk with him. They left the banquet through the small eastern door and followed a path lit by seed lanterns. The heart tree's roots rose and fell beneath their feet, like the backs of sleeping animals. At the river overlook, he stopped. "The council asked again whether you intend to become queen," he said. "What did you tell them?" "That asking you through me was cowardly." "Good answer." "I have been practicing." He took a small object from his coat. It was not a jeweled crown or a royal seal. It was the dented brass compass that Vane's servant had placed on Nessa's counter. Thalen had repaired the hinge, but left the dent untouched. "Rowan said you carried it when you crossed every road that frightened you," he said. "He thought you should have it back." Nessa opened the compass. The needle turned, trembled, and settled toward north. Beneath it, engraved into the brass, were 4 small words. "No chains, no bargains." Thalen closed her fingers around it. "I will not ask you to stand beside me because you owe me, because a treaty needs it, or because a song requires a queen. I am asking whether you want a life with me, whatever shape you choose for it." Nessa looked at the river dividing their kingdoms. Once it had seemed like a border built to keep 2 worlds apart. Now lights shone from the windows of the college on the island between them. "I want my shop," she said. "It is yours." "I want the college." "Also yours." "I want the right to tell you when your plans are stupid." "You have exercised that right without formal recognition." "And I will never pour your wine at a banquet again." "A loss to diplomacy." She stepped closer. "But I would like a life with you." Thalen's careful composure broke into a smile that belonged to no portrait and no kingly song. He bent his forehead to hers. "No chains," he said. "No bargains," she answered. The first time King Thalen drank from Nessa Harrow's hand, He did it to deceive his enemies and place a terrible choice back in the hands of the woman his kingdom had wronged. The next time, he drank because he trusted her. Between those two cups lay a dead king who had learned how to live, an assassin who had remained a healer, and two kingdoms forced to discover that peace was not made by forgetting old wounds. It was made by telling the truth about them, then choosing, day after day, not to pour the poison again.